Vamos a dar comienzo, como decía, a la final en inglés. Para los que habéis participado en las semifinales en castellano, el anuncio será después de la final en inglés, ¿vale? Se producirá la final en inglés y después será el anuncio de castellano. En primer lugar, como decía, presentación de los jueces. Voy a comenzar por este lado de la sala, en concreto con Miranda Bell. Como decía, el panel está formado por 6 personas. La primera de ellas es Miranda Bell. Miranda es actualmente estudiante de Derecho en la UAM, cuenta con una trayectoria en el mundo del debate desde 2016, siendo bicampeona de 2 ediciones de CICAE en 2017 en inglés y subcampeona en torneos universitarios recientes como el BP UAM. Actualmente es formadora y jueza de debate de competición. En segundo lugar tenemos a Alba Lamas. Alba nos acompaña como estudiante de último año de Derecho en la Universidad Complutense de Madrid y colaboradora en Radio Voz y jueza de múltiples torneos de debate en los últimos años. Después tenemos, por el otro lado, a Álvaro Piñera. Un segundo, Álvaro. Perdón, aquí está. Álvaro Piñera lleva debatiendo con nosotros en CICAE durante largo tiempo y desde esta edición forma parte también del equipo de jueces de la Liga de debate CICAE. Es estudiante actualmente de Derecho y Ciencias Políticas en la Universidad Complutense de Madrid y en concreto participó en la 4ª y 5ª Liga de debate de CICAE en la edición de 2020, consiguió el mejor orador y ganó el torneo final de la edición de 2021 en la categoría inglés. En la actualidad forma parte de la Sociedad de Debate de la Universidad Carlos III. Tenemos también a la izquierda a Ana Pérez. Ana, estoy haciendo la traducción en español, disculpame, is in her first year of mechanical engineering at Universidad Carlos III de Madrid. She debated in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th and 5th Liga de Debate CICAE, probably one of the persons who have most participated in the league, being best speaker in 2021 and winning the final tournament in English that very same year. Presently, she is part of the Debating Society of Universidad Carlos III de Madrid. There we have Julian Juste. He's a student of First of Medicine in University Autónoma de Madrid. He debated also in the CICAE League in 2017-18 and 18-19, being sub-champion in the first and last tournament in the 19th edition. He was also a judge in the last edition of CICAE. And lastly, we have a presiding judge of this panel, Alfredo Betancourt. Alfredo Betancourt is probably one of the most experienced judges and debaters in the whole country. He's a consultant in business strategy and corporate communication at Maker and PhD candidate at the Complutense University of Madrid. He has been a faculty member of the Complutense Debating Society for the past 4 years, being responsible for traineeship coaching of young debaters. As a debater, he won several national academic and EP debating tournaments, and he participated as a representative of Spain in the World Championships of Debate. That being the panel, now Alfredo, the floor is yours. Apart before I'm going to announce who are the teams that are going to play in the final round. So in the first semi-final, who had Jane Austen against debaters, the judges have told us that it was a very difficult debate to adjudicate given the quality of the teams. But lastly, the debate was unanimous, and they gave the winner to the team Jane Austen. Congratulations, so please, Jane Austen, join us on the stage for the quarterfinal. The second debate had the team Mozart against the team El Bicho Máximo. That's right. The panel was also unanimous, and the decision is that the team goes through to the final of this first tournament of debate. It is El Bicho Máximo. Please join us on the stage to the final game.
Silence, please. Thanks. Congratulations to both teams. The final is captains New York.
My name is Lara, and I'm a soldier, a veteran in the Afghanistan's conflict since 2005. Now, I have actually no hope that we have learned. It has been 20 years wasted, much pain, and a lot of lives lost. Good evening, ladies, gentlemen, members of the jury. My name is Alejandra, and I come on behalf of the debate group from Jane Austen to uphold our attitude towards the West, taking a good decision by military abandoning Afghanistan, in terms that the advantages clearly outweigh the disadvantages. So first, the West includes Europe, America, South of Africa, and Australia. Afghanistan is today controlled by the Taliban, an Islamic movement who had retaken Kabul in May 2021, which had already been taken in 1996 and recuperated by the NATO allies in 2001. Now, abandon means leave alone, which does not mean that there cannot be any other kind of cooperation or relationship with this country. So therefore, the West can intervene in the country, but military, and at the same time avoid all the consequences that this conflict is having right now. Afghanistan's future is uncertain. We will stand by three arguments. First one, economical expenses and resources. Second one, the political corruption and the operation failure. And third one, the opposition to the occupation. So firstly, the West has spent loads of money in Afghanistan, a total of $2 trillion, according to the University of Brown, which has also estimated that 243,000 people have died as a direct consequence of this war. This is joined to the humanitarian aid, not only Afghan forces, but also NATO allies soldiers who have helped the anti-terrorists against the Taliban. Now, this intervention has only proven incompetence of the West. Why? Because they have been 20 years in the territory and they have not succeeded in anything. So, given this, they have just risked lives and materials, given that especially the money that they have been intervening with in this country has been wasted because of the corruption, the fraud, and also the terrorism in this country. This corruption has undermined the U.S. channeling materials, but also money directly to the Taliban. A total of $45,000 million, which actually is quite devastating and makes it impossible to stop it. Right now, it's too late. On the other hand, we have the opposition to the occupation. Firstly, the popular pressure in the U.S., given that the population is afraid of an insurrection like the 9/11 of terrorism. Even soldiers, even this large elite, who are tired of not seeing any results in this conflict. And finally, even Afghans who have joined the Taliban because they're opposed to the West intervening in their country. So therefore, we believe that the West has taken a good decision by military abandoning Afghanistan because of three reasons. The first one, the unnecessary expenses it involves. The second one, the political corruption in the territory. And the third one, the opposition to the occupation. As Lara said, no more hypocrisy, no more it meant something, because it actually didn't. It was a total and completely waste. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, we are the team El Pizza Máximo formed as Francisco was my first refuter, Sofia Avila as my second refuter, Ana Romero as my concluser, and myself, the introducer to this question. Answering the question, was the West's decision to leave Afghanistan militarily correct? Our team sees the only plausible answer as a solid and powerful no. No, gentlemen, it is not morally or ethically correct to leave it once they started it. And we will demonstrate this with two strong arguments, a moral political argument and a moral ethical argument. Our first argument is based on a moral political argument that the decision to leave Afghanistan was not made unilaterally. Let me put you in context. During the Cold War, the Soviet Union dispatched thousands of troops to Afghanistan, and at the end of December of 1979, assumed complete military and political control of Kabul and vast swaths of the country. The US was part of war, and by this began to burn the Mujahideen in order to defend Afghanistan's sovereignty and religious freedom, while also preventing the Soviet expansion into the Middle East and South Asia. However, this aid increased the likelihood that the Soviet Union would invade Afghanistan in order to continue its expansion. As a result, the United States began sending troops to Afghanistan. One of the most heinous events in recent history, as a result of this tragedy, the US launched a search in Afghanistan in hopes of finding Al-Qaeda leader, Osama bin Laden, the one that terrorized the country. It did so by mobilizing about 1,000 soldiers, and also, in addition to Afghan warriors who had been trained and recruited. As a result, the Taliban and Western countries were happening for odds and for a long time. The Afghan people have paid in a high price in terms of economic losses, human casualties, political instability, and corruption as a result of this war. Given this effect, it is vital that we examine the historical treatment of the U.S. foreign policy prior to and during the Soviet-Afghan war critically. This is why the major Western powers, particularly the United States, should not have left Afghanistan, because the country's fundamental issues were caused by them. And leaving a country wrecked by war, starvation, poverty, is just unthinkable. Our second argument is a moral ethical argument, one predicted on the idea that leaving a country in the state Afghanistan was in the wrong. With few to no rights, individuals, particularly women and children, were left with no one to speak up for them. And the rights, depending on the time period, women's rights in Afghanistan have shifted back and forth. They earned equality under the 1964 Constitution, but when the Taliban won political power in 1996, all the liberties and freedoms were taken away. This resulted in Human Rights Watch and the San Jose State University Human Rights Institute announced that the Taliban in Afghanistan's western city of Herat are committing widespread and serious human rights violations against women and girls. Since seizing control of the city in August 12, 2021, the Denying Women Freedom movement outside their homes, imposing mandatory dress codes, severely restricting access to employment and education, and restricting the right to peaceful assembly. Women in Herat told the two organizations that the day that the Taliban took control of the city, their lives were turned upside down. The women had worked outside their homes or worked even students. They were involved in their communities and even often as leaders. They claimed that shortly after the Taliban arrived, they were imprisoned indoors. They claimed that shortly after the Taliban arrived, they were imprisoned indoors and ready to leave their home. We cannot just leave it behind. It's just not morally correct. Thank you.
Members of the jury, opposing team, audience, good afternoon. My name is Alana, and my team and I, Alejandra, Fabiana, and Christina, are here to defend why the West withdrawal from Afghanistan was undeniably the right call. Firstly, I will rebuttal the opposing team's line of argumentation and first argument, and next I will proceed to build our line of argumentation and subsequent arguments. The opposite team makes a whole line of argumentation revolving around moral and politics and moral and ethics. Well, Just to add a tiny little bit of what Fabiana will address later on, moral and ethics are completely subjective. Now, they've also talked about how the West leaving Afghanistan at such a critical time has made it completely go under and completely break and be weak and vulnerable. Well, how do you suggest we change that? How do you suggest that we make a country dependent on another? Don't you think that is a complete waste of time and money and resources? Because it is. You cannot make one country dependent of another. Next, they talk about human rights, but they have failed to talk about all of the lives that have been lost, all the soldiers, all the officers that have died in Afghanistan fighting a war that didn't even make sense, that didn't have a clear objective, and there wasn't even a point staying more than 20 years there. There was no point. Now I will proceed to build our arguments. One of the many positive consequences the Western withdrawal from Afghanistan has had is the saving of immense economical and military resources that have now stopped going to waste. Nearly $2,330 trillion were wasted into the reconstruction of Afghanistan as a University of Brown has presented to us. And I'd like you all to focus on this green triangle right here. The other team can see, yes. This money was invested into the veterans' care. That means that all of the veterans that had post-war traumas, psychological and physical traumas, were taken care of, and there was a lot of money being invested into them. And I'd like you all to hold on to that thought, especially the opposing team. The CIGAR, short for Special Inspector General for the Afghanistan Reconstruction, published a report analyzing the matter at hand. They concluded that all of the money spent was basically lost due to fraud, waste, and abuse of power. It was destined to failed counter-narcotics and stabilization programs, and finally, they concluded that all of the money was being invested in projects and structures that were not ever going to be sustainable or work. Yes, your question?
Don't you think that it's not a loss of money if you're talking about people's lives and rights?
The money was being invested in things that were not sustainable. They were never being invested into people. Actually, as I've already mentioned, they were being supposedly invested into the veterans' care and many other things. But as I'm going to prove to you right now, they weren't ever going to get to the veterans or to any other source. Now, the University of Brown published a separate report about the lives that were lost. Yes, I know. Human rights, what the opposite team is advocating for, they failed to talk about these human rights, the most important one of all, life. The University of Brown, as I've already said, published a report stating that 7,000 U.S. service members and 8,000 contractors died in the post-9/11 wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, and elsewhere. More than 30,177 U.S. service members and veterans died due to suicide over in Afghanistan. Remember that little triangle of all the money that was being invested into their care? Well, apparently, it wasn't getting to them because if not, they wouldn't have taken their own lives. And 177,000 uniformed Afghans, Pakistanis, Iraqis, and Syrian allies died as of November 2019. Our next argument is tied to this last one. If all the money spent, which it was going directly into a corrupt system, clearly corrupt, which I'll explain right now, the Operation Enduring Freedom was not working. The CIGAR, an authority that I've already mentioned, published a separate report analyzing this matter, stating that officers and public authorities often acted guided by private interests and were often bribed. In a survey this authority conducted in 2015, they asked civilians if they had ever experienced corruption when contacting government officials. An appalling 63.7% said they did when coming into contact with the judiciary, and 61.6% also said they did when they came into contact with the customs office. A clear admission of this, even Afghan business leaders told U.S. embassy officials in 2011 that bribery and corruption were, and I quote, pervasive, accepted, and arguably even encouraged. Ladies and gentlemen, if all of these evidences aren't enough to support our idea that all the resources were just being in a corrupt system, I don't know what is. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Adi. Since my sister was a little girl, she always wanted a dream to study medicine. Now she's 15 years old, and she's not able to receive the necessary studies to become so. Dear judges, public, and opposing team, my name is Preuniversitario, and I'm the first defeater for the team standing against the question raised in this debate. The opposing team has given us a lot of data and numbers about American soldiers and Afghan and recruited soldiers that have lost their lives or are suffering. But they haven't really talked about all the civilians in Afghanistan that have lost their lives and are now in a terrible living state due to this conflict. Our first argument is a more political argument that argues that the decision of living in Afghanistan was not asserted. As my introductor already mentioned in the story, the main problems that are suffering in Afghanistan were created by Western countries. Using declassified US government documents from the 1970s and 1980s, this corroborates and develops the definition made in an interview with Brzezinski, a USA National Security Counselor in 1998, argued that the Soviet military intervention in Afghanistan was a US provocation that bolstered US Cold War foreign policy's objectives. Ultimately, the Soviet-Afghan War launched a cascade of devastating long-term and large-scale consequences, such as the creation of a global concept of the violent jihad, the formation of Al-Qaeda, and the rise of the Taliban regime, ultimately leading to 9/11, one of the worst, terrible episodes of modern history. Yes.
What about all of the civilians that died during the West's occupation because there was conflicts between the Taliban and the occupators?
These people really, they died because of they failed to. This question will be answered by city refugee. The economy has collapsed since the other member countries and the US left the country. After 20 years where the economy has increased, it's returned to its original value. This implies that humanitarian aid is basically none. This is why the main Occidental powers and the USA shouldn't have left Afghanistan, as the main problems were created by them. And leaving our country devastated by war, famine, and poverty cannot be permitted. Our second argument is a moral ethical argument, based on the concept that it is unethical to live a country in the state Afghanistan was in. With the USA in Afghanistan, women and children had gained some rights back, but with the abandonment of the USA, they went back to having little to no rights. The Taliban in Afghanistan's western city of Iraq are committing widespread and serious human rights violations against women and girls. According to the Human Rights Watch and the San Jose State University, Human Rights Institute taking over the city on August 12, 2021, the Taliban can instill fear among women and girls. Sorry, there's no more questions. The Taliban has instilled fear among women and girls, imposing laws such as denying women freedom of movement outside their homes, imposing strict dress restrictions, and severely restricting access to employment and education. After being employed outside their homes or being students, when the Taliban seized power, again they found themselves trapped indoors, afraid to leave their house with a male family member or because of dress restrictions, with their access to education and employment, which caused a big loss of income for many and changed their life severely. According to a 2016 UNICEF report, when the USA was still in Afghanistan, there were almost 9 million children in education, of which 39% were girls. Now, 2/6 of the 9 million is non-existent. Apart from the women's suppression, for decades there has been a major issue regarding hunger and poverty that has struck Afghanistan's children, and since the Taliban seized power some months ago, the nation has been spiraling into a deep humanitarian crisis. As claimed by the United Nations, if humanitarian aid doesn't consume, more than 1 million children will lose their lives. The application of strict Islamic laws and the reestablishment of the Taliban's government play a role in the fear that is rising among citizens. This is reflected in the internal displacement that have taken place. In recent months, more than 250,000 people have fled their homes in order to try and escape the Taliban's regime, of which almost 80% are women and children. Since the retirement of the USA, civilian deaths have risen and are now almost 50% higher than in previous years. Death rates for women and children in 2021 are also the highest they have been since 2009. All these tragedies after the retirement of the USA continues to prove that the decision to abandon Afghanistan was not asserted, since it has caused further repression, especially for children and women. And with our two arguments, our team will explain and will see how the only possible answer is that it was not asserted to leave Afghanistan and leave those people into their own life. Thank you.
argument as well as constructing a last one. Now, the opposing team said an argument on morality and ethics. I'm sorry to inform you that these two things are totally subjective. For example, even the most provisional and experienced philosophers have completely different views and ideals on what a certain morality is and a certain ethic is. Therefore, they are opinions and they are suppositions or beliefs that can vary between one person and another. And they also mentioned that being in Afghanistan caused lots of problems in Afghanistan. Well, therefore, then why should we stay there? You are agreeing with our point. I would like to remind you that we're talking about military intervention. Therefore, we can help with other things that you mentioned, like education or other ways. For example, it was stated that the Western governments will give a total of $12 billion for civilian aid between 2021 and 2025 after the withdrawal to help them. Therefore, we are helping them, but not militarily. They also said something on terrorism, but I would like to remind them that terrorism is always going to be present, and we cannot guarantee that by being there, things will end. They also said that death has been, that there have been a great number of deaths. However, as per shown by this graph, actually, ever since the troops started to withdraw from Afghanistan, the number of deaths have started to decrease. Now, I'm going to go on and construct our argument. Isn't it a bit ironic that the opposing team is a great advocate of human rights? However, they seem to not know the existence of this one, the right of self-determination. According to the International Convent on Civil and Political Rights, all people have the right to freely determine their political status and freely pursue their economic, social, and cultural development, without prejudice to any obligations arising out of international economic corporations based upon the principle of mutual benefit and international law. This is backed by many articles, like for example the one in the Charter of the United Nations, Convention on Civil and Political Rights, the right of the child, Prevention and Punishment of Crime and Genocide, and principles of international law. So what do the people in Afghanistan want? Well, the Taliban have managed to tie themselves to Afghan identity and religion. They are Muslims, and so are 99.7% of Afghans. The Taliban have said Afghans to fight for their homeland, using, for example, the jihad, which is an Arab word that means defense against oppression by outsiders. So, even though many Afghans don't actually share the political views of the Taliban, according to the Asian Foundation survey, which is in fact the most respected survey in Afghanistan, regarding this Afghanistan, they said that 77% of Afghans support the Taliban because they are Afghans, Muslim, and wage the jihad. In other words, they do not want the West to be there. They are willing to support the Taliban, who, as they mentioned, are, let's say, not good for them, just because they don't want the West there. So it's clear that they're desperate for us, the West, to leave, because they are willing to support the Taliban in order for us to do so. Now, let's move to the other side, the West. 2 in 3 Americans support the U.S. withdrawal. 81% Democrats, 65% Independents, and 43% Republicans. Regarding governments outside of the United States, NATO governments had actually largely scaled back their troops in Afghanistan way before the military U.S. withdrawal. And, for example, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg stated, "We went into Afghanistan together. We have adjusted our posture together, and we are united in living together." So, how is it that the opposing team is a great advocate of human rights, but they're willing to take this one, the right of self-determination, away from people by military intervening in Afghanistan when it's clear that the West doesn't want it and Afghanistan doesn't want it? Thank you.
Hi, I'm Barisha. I used to be a CEO of a company in Afghanistan. Since I've been sacked, I can no longer provide for my daughters. I say this because Barisha can. Hi, I'm Sophia Avila. I'm the second recruiter of the team who's against the retirement of the Western troops from Afghanistan. First, I'm going to start by talking about why we disagree with the arguments from the opposing team. First, you say morals are subjective. We can talk about certain morals being subjective, well, all morals being subjective, but we cannot talk about life being subjective and basic human rights. Not being able to leave your house because you're afraid you're going to be killed, being a woman, or having to leave only with your eyes being seen, that's not a way to live. And we firmly defend that the USA did make an impact throughout the 20 years that we're there. We have an interview, well, not an interview, but some claims from the women, thousands of women in Iraq that say, here we have evidence, that say that after the retirement of the troops, this changed completely, and they were no longer able to have the rights. This not only is incorrect, but before the Afghans, the USA entered, they were not used to this rights, but once they were given to them throughout the 20 years, and you take them away, it's a huge impact in their lives. You also talk about American suicide. As far as we're concerned, the military service is not mandatory in the United States, and they know what they're getting themselves into. They know this huge conflicts that are happening, and they stand by them. So this is just out of the question. Because of the thousands of that you talk about the civilians is why they should in fact stay. They owe the civilians because of their implication with the start of this, the root of this problem, which was with the Soviet Union. They owe the civilians their rights and to fight for them because the consequences were they had a key role in the start of them. I'm going to use a metaphor. If I'm a doctor and you're sick, you come to me, I give you a prescription, and I give you the wrong prescription. Not only I am obligated to cure you, but I'm also obligated to give you the right prescription because of the consequences. This is the same thing with Afghanistan. Not only they created the issue, and they left without being successful, doing the goals they wanted to do, which was to terminate the Taliban, to terminate the Talibans and to finish Al-Qaeda, which they didn't do. Not only this, but they made everything worse, and they killed all those people, so they're morally obligated to stay there. And also, I'm going to use another metaphor here. If we have a balloon, and the knot is what's holding the air inside, and we remove the knot, obviously the air is going to go out and it's going to explode. So this is the same with Afghanistan. The troops leaving is not going to make the situation better. It's going to make it worse, and we have evidence of that. You're saying all of this money was a waste. No, this life was a waste. It's not a waste. We see it is in fact an investment in lives, in children and women's rights. And also, we know this cost has been huge, but it had to be done because they started the issue, and we talked about a moral ethical argument that we have the responsibility to stay. Also, we know that maybe the Taliban, finishing the Taliban is not the way to go, but they can still use the money and refocus the way of investing it by using the troops there as a mediator to give to make sure that the money used there is being properly invested and used for humanitarian help. So that's why we strongly stand with our moral ethical argument and our moral political argument. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Enhorabuena, and the conclusion for the team that is truly attends the question today in this debate. And I'll start telling why the in favor argumentative line has to really be taken out by my team, and then reassuring why our arguments are still standing. They have first presented us an economical expenses and resources argument, which establishes that there has been too much money spent, that Occident should be. Well, my article has actually rebutted that it is true that there have been a lot of costs, but the consequences of living have been proved by evidences to be even worse than studying. There is a need to still fight in order to have a successful outcome, and this way preserve the rights of people. So we assume that the argument has been taken out. They have afterwards talked about a political argument that was only just outlined, and then they just try to, the opposing team just spent time rebutting our first argument, which is related to this one, but they really didn't develop any information about it, so we assume that there is another argument to be taken on. And then the opposing team presented a third argument about the opposition to the occupation. That says that the occupation was bad from the beginning. Well, we do agree entering in the beginning was a mistake, but as my article rebutted, regarding the fact that they entered Afghanistan to solve a problem, they cannot leave an even worse situation as there was before entering. So this argument doesn't make any sense, and we assume that it is being taken out. Now I'll reassure where our arguments are still standing. We have a more political argument where the U.S. entered the problem of Afghanistan in order to solve it in the beginning, but the thing is that they cannot live when they even worsen the actual situation. So as they have rebutted our argument with their argumentative line, we assume that this argument is still standing. And then our second argument, a more ethical argument, where we establish that Occidental countries cannot live as the consequences of this are: 1, a poor lifestyle for Afghan people, 2, women with no rights, and 3, children dying of famine and terrible life conditions. They try to rebuttal this, saying that the most important right is being violated, which is life, and my article rebuttal that soldiers that go to fight in Afghanistan, they aren't forced to go there, and because they are always obviously aware where they're going. I mean, they're going to a war in Afghanistan. They know where they're going. Obviously, it's a terrible, it's a terrible place to be, but it's a war. They already know it. And all the stories that my teammates just told are from women, children, and people that are under the Afghan regime. We tell you this because they cannot. Thank you very much.
Opposing team, members of the jury, good afternoon. I would like to thank you all and the audience for attending this debate today. My name is Cristina, and I'm here to conclude my team's intervention. I will be summarizing the key arguments presented in this session today and explaining why the ones we brought today are stronger and more reasonable. Our first argument was resources and how the withdrawal of the Western troops from Afghanistan saves a lot of that resource, not only economical but also human, that are being wasted. All the billions of dollars that were being invested in this operation were used not for what they were meant for, and also thousands of people were killed during this conflict. All of this is tied to the corruption. All this money invested is going into a corrupted system where public authorities use all this money for their personal matters rather than the solving of the problems that this government had. There was never a right time to leave, so better do it sooner than later. The first argument that our opponents presented was moral in politics. And they talked about how all the problems that Afghanistan has were caused by the West. So, if we are making Afghanistan worse, why should we stay? As there are other ways of helping that do not involve military action. Their second argument, and last argument, was moral ethics, where they talked about human rights.
We also talked and explained to them that it is also as important the right to live, the right of self-determination, and that we explained to them that the West is withdrawing militarily. That doesn't mean that they will not help in other ways. Our last argument was a popular opinion. We stated that Afghans don't want the Western in their country, and that causes a feeling of rejection. Most of the Afghans associated with the Taliban do so not because they share a mentality or an ideology, but because they, as the Taliban, don't want us there. On the other hand, the Westerns were demonstrated by my teammate Fabiana that 2/3 of the American population support the withdrawal. I would like to state and remember you that all your argumental line is based on a subjective point of view. And for so, we cannot accept your arguments, and we believe our own are stronger. And I would also like to make points about the veteran lives and how you talked about how the money, probably it's not the traumatized veterans, but all the money that was supposed to go to them, but didn't, and so they end up suiciding. I would like you to remember that the war veteran, my teammate Alejandra named in her first intervention, and as she said, no more dead soldiers, no more hypocrisy, no more pretending it meant anything. Thank you very much for your attention.